Hello and welcome to this presentation from the Urban Penguin. My name is Andrew Mallett, and in today's presentation we're going to use Ansible. Yes, Ansible. We're dropping back to configuration management and we're going to have Ansible create a couple of things for us. On the Ansible controller, we're going to create a cron job so we can automate collection of information from our logs. With our logs, we want to be looking at those IP addresses that are trying to log on as the root account. Root account via SSH is disabled, but those IP addresses that are being used to manifest these attacks are probably those that should be blocked. We then want to take those IP addresses and across a range of machines, both Ubuntu and Red Hat based machines with Rocky Linux, we want to make sure that we add them to the firewall. We're going to be using Firewall D on all of our systems, and we're going to blacklist these IP addresses. So very quickly, we're going to learn how relatively simple it is to both document our firewall configuration and implement the firewall configuration across many hosts. Come on, let's take a look at it. Now here we are then on my Ubuntu system. I've already got Ansible up and running, and I have two Ubuntu systems including this system and two Rocky 9 systems that we're going to look at managing. The first thing is we have to understand how we can read from the log files. I know that root access is disabled to this system. When my delegates are told to connect to the system, they know that root access is denied. But some people, of course, will still be trying to log on as root. So those IP addresses that are still trying to log on as root will be those IP addresses we probably want to boot out of our system. So we can go through and use journalctl. This is really good, centralizing all of my log information. We can look for our service unit of SSH. It's SSH on Ubuntu, it's SSHD on Rocky-based systems, but we're looking at it on my local system. So we can see then the information relating to the logs of the SSH service, including, say, some failed password for the user root towards the bottom of the screen. Well, I can then clear out of this, so I can just use Q to jump out of this. If I want to, I can grab the string failed password, so I can easily paste that back in. And I can then use grep from inside of journalctl, and then look for my failed password so we easily search then our logs for those people that are attempting to log on as root. Now, it's only one IP address that we've got, but we can see from my uptime that I've been up just 8 hours. So these are new and fresh systems. We want to protect these systems from unauthorized access, and by blocking the IP addresses of those users trying to log on as root, they're probably also trying to log on as other users as well, so it's going to work as a good generic test. But to pull out the IP address, we can pipe the output through to grep. We're going to have to use an enhanced regular expression, and I'm using the lowercase o because I only want to show the match. And I'm going to be searching for an IP address. So I only want the IP address returned from this lines. So as we go through, we open up in our single quotes, our regular expression string. We start off by creating a group. So our left parentheses, and then we put in our range, a range from 0 through to 9. We're looking for numbers. But in an IP address, we need a minimum of 1 number and a maximum of 3. So if we think of our dotted decimal format, it's going to be made up of groups of 1 to 3 numbers. It's then going to be followed by a dot. So we can then put in our dot, but we're going to have to escape the dot, so use the backslash before we put the dot in. This is because the dot is a special meta character inside of our regular expression, so we need to remove the special meaning from it. So this then represents our group, and we can group these together by closing off my parentheses, and then I can specify how many of these groups of numbers do I want. And you might think we want 4, but we actually want 3. It's only the first 3 groups of numbers that are going to be followed by the dot. So this represents my first 3 numbers within my dotted decimal IP address. And then I can just go through and put in the 4th block of numbers. And that's going to be a lot more simple because it's going to be the simple range. So open up my square brackets, 0 through to 9. And then, of course, we have to put our quantifiers in. So a minimum of 1, a maximum of 3. Close off our quantifier brace brackets and close off our quotes. So that's my regular expression. Now, I do accept that it's horrid, but it is then going to search for the IP address. And as we can see now, searching returns just the IP address. But now we can quite clearly see it's one IP address is being used to access this system. But we want to make sure that we only show unique IP addresses so we can drill down just to the one. This is going to be very useful if we've got hundreds of entries, which we will after a little bit. And then we can go through and redirect the output through to my home directory, so Tux's home directory, and a file I'm just going to call server. With that done, cutting out that server file, if we can spell server, we can see then that we've got our IP address. Now, I could do this regularly myself, but of course we're going to forget. So the idea is that we can create a cron job. I can just create the cron job myself. However, I probably will prefer to have Ansible do this, especially if I'm using Ansible, because that's going to help document my firewall setup. So as I go through and create a playbook for this, I'm just going to call it firewall.yaml. We can put in our 3 dashes to open up our YAML document. We can create a new play. Remember, with our plays and our tasks, they should have quite descriptive names. I'm going to keep them short just for the simplicity of typing here. So I'm just going to create cron job. We can specify the hosts that it's going to run on, and we only need the cron job created on the local host, but I can use the file on the local host as a blacklist for all of my firewalling systems. We're going to elevate our privileges because we're writing to the system cron file, and we can then set a list of tasks, but we're only going to have the one task creating our cron job. As we then go through, we can name this again. And as always, as I say, the names are meant to be descriptive. So somebody running through this, even with little experience, should be able to read from the English language, hopefully, what we are meant to be doing. We're going to be using the cron module. Now, I can just call it cron because I'm using Ansible 2.9. But if you're using later versions of Ansible, you should be using the full collection name. Ansible 2.9 doesn't understand collections, so I can use the simple names. We can go through and specify a name. This is going to be a comment next to the cron entry. And then we can specify the minute that I want to run this on. And I'm just going to put 0, saying that I want it to run on the hour. We put it inside of quotes because it should be a string going through to the text file. Just seeing a 0 there, it will think it's a number, so we then convert it to a string. It needs to run as the root user. We can specify the cron file name. This is going to create a file inside of our /etc/cron.d directory. And I'm just going to give it the same name as the comment we set earlier. Now, I don't need to set any more of my time elements because I can allow that to run on the default of asterisk. So I can say that I want this to be present. And then we specify the job. Now, I could specify it all on one line, but that's going to make a very long line for this particular job. So we're going to use the YAML fold operator, and we're going to use the greater than fold operator. With the greater than fold operator, this specifies to YAML that where we put in carriage returns, that they are not going to be maintained. As we then go through and specify our entry, I've already got this stored elsewhere, so I'm going to paste it in. And as I go through then and paste my entry in, everything has come across apart from the J of journalctl. Now, I don't particularly need the end of line markers because this is going to be translated across as a single line inside of my cron job. Remember, using the greater than symbol, we can write multi-line content, but the new lines aren't maintained. I'm going to put, though, a line continuation marker in just so it's easier for people to read. So I've just got the backslash at the end of my lines. But this is exactly the same job that we looked at before from the command line, where we're searching for our failed root logins and extracting the IP address. Now, this is all I need for the moment. We're going to be adding more to the file later, but for the moment, this is my cron job created. I say Ansible is already set up and running, so I can then go through and run the Ansible playbook, and I can use escape and dot just to bring up firewall YAML again. Give that the big enter key, and look, there we go, and we get that wonderful yellow coming back saying that we've changed the cron job entry. I was gathering facts. Technically, I don't need to gather facts, but I'm happy to leave that the way that it is. It's only one system we're collecting on. But as I go through now and cat our cron.d and SSH root attempt, we can see there that we've got the correct entry in my file. Now, the idea is then the IP addresses that we're collecting on the controller, we can block them on all of our hosts. As I say, I've got 2 Ubuntu hosts and I've got 2 Rocky 9 hosts. So we can see how the one playbook can easily cater for everything. So I can just go through now and create a new play in the playbook. So I can set the name of the play. And again, normally we want this to be quite descriptive. Setting up multiple plays allows me to target different hosts. And now we can go through and target all of our hosts. So that's going to be the 4 systems that I'm managing. We can elevate our privileges, so become and true. I'm happy to elevate at the play level because we need elevation for all of my tasks. I don't need to collect my facts, so we can go through and have gather facts and set that to false. And then continuing in, we can set our tasks. And we are going to have a few tasks that we're going to set up here. So as I go through then and set up the name of removing UFW. UFW is going to be the default firewall on our Ubuntu systems, but we want to make sure that it is removed. So we can then go through and specify to use the package module. And we can specify the name is UFW, and we can ensure that it's absent or not installed. There is a typo here. I've got ensure, and that should be state, but we'll leave this in and see the error that it produces so we can tidy it up later. As I then go through and specify the name, this is another task. We want to install Firewall D. So Firewall D is available on both the Rocky system and on the Ubuntu system. So it makes the perfect firewall to run across my mixed system. Again, we're working with the package here, and here we're going to look for the state being present. So we can see the difference between the 2 tasks here. One is using ensure, one is using state. We have got an error, but seeing errors isn't such a bad thing. And we can continue then with our next task, Well, we need to make sure that the service is running. Now, on an Ubuntu system, it will be running. It's just the way that it works. But we also need to make sure that it's up and running on the Rocky systems. So we can use then our service module. And we can then go through and specify the name. The name is firewalld. We don't have to worry about the package name or the service name differing between Ubuntu and Rocky. We want the state to be started and enabled true. So it's currently running and it is enabled for auto startup. So that's our firewall in place. Firewalld automatically allows access to SSH, so we don't need to be concerned about adding in SSH access. So we can go through then and now look at blocking our IPs. So a new task. This is going to be using the firewalld Ansible module. So firewalld. And then as we go through with this, we can say that we want the rule enabled. So state enabled. We want it for our drop zone. Any source added to our drop zone is going to be automatically denied access to everything on our system. And that's what we want for these IP addresses. So the drop zone is going to work good for me. We want it in our permanent configuration, the backend XML files. So we can go through and set our permanent to true. But we also want it in our runtime configuration. So we can set immediate and true. We can then go through and set our source. So this is going to be our IP address or our network. For us, it's going to be individual IP addresses that we are adding in. And we're going to use a variable for this, and we're just going to call it item. The variable is going to come from a loop, which we're putting in right now. Now, the loop is part of the task, so we go back to line up with the name and the module, and we set our loop. And then our loop is going to be made up of a lookup. This is going to be a file lookup. So we're going to be looking inside of our server file. And we comma separate our arguments. And then I always put the full path when I'm using the playbook. So we can have home, tux, and server. And just make sure we spell home correctly. So that's my lookup done, so I can close my parentheses. But we're going to use then a further method on this, where we're going to split the file. So we read in line by line, so we're going to split on the new line character. Otherwise, we'd read the whole file in. We want to read line by line as we loop. Now this then looking good for me. We've got then our original play plus the new play that we've created, which is going to make sure that UFW is uninstalled, firewall is installed and running, and then blocking our IP addresses that we locate on the controller in the server file. So let's go through and save, and then we can go through and run this. Don't forget that we have got a typo, so we are going to expect errors. But if you're typing a lot, you can kind of expect errors. We don't have to type it all up in one go. We can actually put one task after another. But as we then go through and get to that remove UFW, so we can see the task that is causing the problem, and it's saying an unsupported parameter for our modules. So that's okay. We kind of knew that as we were typing it, but don't be frightened by these errors. If we go back in then and edit it, as we move down, we can see then that we've got our ensure. That should be state. But make sure you check on the name where the error is coming from, the task name. And then, of course, we can run through it again, and we should be able to run through now. We can see that we already had it removed on the 2 Rocky systems, so we're having now to remove UFW from our Ubuntu systems. We're now ready to install, and then we've got to wait for it to install, but we can see then it comes back as changed on a couple of systems here. We'll be waiting for it to install on, here you go, another Ubuntu system. If we find that it takes too long, we know we've only got one other system to go and install on, and it does seem then that it's taking longer compared to the others. It's one of our Ubuntu systems, it's the 18 host that doesn't seem to be working. Well, we could then go through and just end it now and repeat it again. We're giving it a little bit of time, but it doesn't really seem to be doing too much. So I'm just doing Control-C. And then we can go through and play the playbook again. Let's just move this up to the top of the screen and go through then and run that one more time. And we'll see if it installs this time. So, but we can see actually it must have installed last time. It's coming back green. We can see now that the firewall is running on all of our systems. And look, we've now been able to block the IP addresses. And I can run this many times. And that's the beauty of Ansible. It will only do what it needs to do so it can carry on from where it left off. So now we can go through and even just on this system, although I know it will be on all of my systems, if I go through then and check my firewall CMD command, when I go through and check on this, where if I list everything, so list all from my drop zone, so -- zone drop, we should then see the entry for the IP address. Now I know it's only one IP address that we've added, but it will progressively be more as we start capturing more IP addresses that are being used to try and access our system as root.
All that is left to say is thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this, then you are probably sadder than I first thought. For more of this drivel, please subscribe, like and comment to @TheUrbanPenguin.